Welcome to the Data Leadership Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Algmin. Data is everywhere in our businesses, and it takes leadership to make the most of it. We bring you the people, stories, and lessons to help you become a data leader. We've partnered with Dataversity to provide listeners with 20% off your first training center purchase with promo code AlgminDL. Go to dataleadershiptraining.com to learn more. Today on episode 96, we welcome Jack McGuinness. Jack is an executive team coach and co-founder of Relationship Impact, a consulting firm focused on helping organizations build great leadership teams. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Anthony. I appreciate it.
So we're excited to have you here. Why don't you just take a few minutes and give us kind of that story of your career and how those earlier experiences led you into kind of what you're doing now?
Yeah, there's sort of a method to why I do what I do today. As we were talking about a little bit earlier, it just wasn't a linear path for sure. So I'll give you a little bit of the background from a leadership perspective. So early on, I went to West Point, so that's a sort of a leadership petri dish, I guess you would call it. And so I went there, and right when I graduated from there, everyone you graduate and you get in a leadership position as a lieutenant. And from my perspective, I was an infantry platoon leader with the 10th Mountain Division. So I had, when I first started, I had about 35 guys that worked for me, and I was 22 and they were 19. so it was an amazing experience, and really the good thing that the military does, particularly in infantry settings, is you have a platoon sergeant and a cadre of sergeants that work for you, but you really learn from them, right? And so that's kind of that had this whole non-commissioned officer construct in the United States is a big foundational element of how officers are really trained in the military. So I learned a lot. You come in there hard charging, you think you know a lot more than you do, and I learned very quickly that I didn't know a lot, and that I needed to take a step back and learn a little bit about not only the technical aspects of running a infantry platoon, but also how to lead people. And I think I had some innate capabilities from just from growing up, but so that was definitely foundational. Learning the trials and tribulations of and the good and bad of how to manage other people at a very early age. I learned some great lessons there, and I think one of the biggest things I think you learn is a sense of humility and a sense of self-awareness that you don't know everything, and it's okay that you don't know everything. I'm not sure I caught on to that right away, but it was anxiety provoking not knowing how to do a lot of stuff. But you learn, and it's really what I think one of the key lessons I learned early in that experience was that you serve the people that you lead. And I learned that, and they may work for you, but you really work for them as well. And I really learned that early on. So I had some great experience in the military, and then I got out of the military. I got my MBA, so I'm an engineer by education, and then I got an MBA. So I'm a very right brain thinker that is logical, and there's a plan for this, there's a process for that. And so I became a management consultant. I got a very cool opportunity out of my MBA program to work for a guy who was from Deloitte, who was about 15 years older than me, who was starting his own management consulting firm. So I became one of his first employees, and not only learned how to be a good consultant from this guy and from many of my colleagues that were many years older than me in this organization, but also learned how to build a company from nothing. And so as he was building this, over time, I became his chief operating officer, and we grew to a pretty cool boutique management consulting firm. And so I learned how to be a consultant and work with a lot of different cool organizations and in that capacity. And I also learned how to build something from scratch, which was both were very, very cool opportunities. And so from a leadership perspective, as a consultant, your whole job is to research, be diligent, and to influence, right? You don't get to tell anyone what to do necessarily, right? And then from a building an organization perspective, it's, putting the pieces together and learning how to be a player coach and then more of a coach. And so that came from that experience. And so my next job after that is it was a great business model we had. We all made pretty good money, but it was a burnout model too. So I left and I looked for another venture, and with a couple of passive partners, I bought a company. So another experience and an anxiety provoking experience. I bought a contract packaging company up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We did consumer products packaging for Godiva, Unilever, companies like that. And so bought an existing company. It was a turnaround. So used a lot of the management consulting practices I had. But what I learned very early there is that it's a lot easier to give advice than it is to actually do it yourself. And as CEO of that company, I often felt very alone. And again, had that same experience that I had as a lieutenant, where I thought I was supposed to know a little bit more than I should have. I don't know why I didn't. Those lessons didn't hold as much as they should have. But I best thing I ever did was hire a CFO that was a lot older than me, that had some good experience under him, and we were really good partners in crime in terms of learning. So I learned a lot about how to delegate more. How to empower people without, squashing them too much. A little bit about empathy, right? Because a lot, it's tough. It's a tough business, by the way. And so, some other great lessons, right? And then probably one of the biggest lessons I learned was going bankrupt. This firm went bankrupt with the financial crisis in 2009, and we got our legs taken out from under us. We were aggressive and over leveraged, and bought a lot of equipment to bring in new customers, and then a lot of the companies brought their contracts back in house, and we were left holding the bag, and all that we could have structured it differently, could have done a lot of different things. But from a leadership perspective, I think the thing I was most proud of is how we dealt with the people and our vendors going through those tough times. And it's do the right thing was the mantra there for sure, as best as you possibly can in some difficult circumstances. So fast forward to now, I was in a midlife crisis back then, started Relationship Impact with a classmate of mine from college who was work at GW getting his PhD in leadership. And so we put our heads together, and it's morphed into some different shapes and forms. But really, what we do now is work with the executive teams of small to mid-sized companies to help them build strong leadership teams. And I'm sure we'll get more into that now. But as you can see, the path wasn't linear, but there are a couple things that really enabled me to do what I do now. And I think, what I do now, I think we do it pretty well, is the experiences we've had with many, many different companies in many different settings in some chaotic situations and leading organizations through some chaotic times. I think the experience is and the empathy with going through failure and crisis has helped me be a better partner and coach to the executives and teams I work with.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an incredible story, and there's so many things I want to follow up on in that, but I was just kind of riveted because, and I really just want to thank you for your openness about either failure through a bankruptcy or just recognizing your own anxieties or recognition that you don't know everything. I think it's an important facet for anyone to realize, like, nobody has it all figured out, and you're a fool if you think you do, and certainly come off like a fool if you act like you do. And so it's
The
really
challenge is you got people my age, my generation. I'm late 50s, right? We were sort of taught that you had to know a lot, and that's kind of the mantra. And information age changed all of that very dramatically and quickly. And so even back then, you really couldn't know everything either, but but you thought you had to.
Yeah, I feel like I'm lucky that I came of age at the right time. Like, I think I have a pretty fast processor overall, but like, I can't remember anything. So like, being able to look something up quickly and to like resynthesize stuff quickly is definitely plays to my personal strengths and weaknesses as well. But I really appreciate, you mentioned something when you were talking about being a CEO of a firm you'd bought and doing that. There was a thought that I had, because you talked about how you had to learn to kind of delegate, and it made me think, like, you had these experiences, you've worked at different places and consulting and otherwise, you've been in the military, and you've been an entrepreneur where it's your money on the line and you're at the top of the pyramid in terms of the org structure and all of that. And I wonder, it's got to be a bit difficult to delegate under the circumstances where you're the one who owns the company, or your life is on the line, compared to if you're just working at a place and you have a team, like, oh, I can delegate something to that. Is there a fundamental difference in feeling when you're doing that, or is it more similar than I may be giving it credit to?
Yeah, so I think in if you look at the military, my military experience, which was a few years as a platoon leader and an executive officer, and in the contract packaging world, right, as the CEO of that company, I had no choice but to have to delegate, because I really, I didn't know a lot, right? I knew enough to be dangerous around how to set up a production line, right? But I didn't know the equipment as well as the folks that worked for me did. I didn't know warehousing as much as the people that worked for me, and the whole logistics side of stuff. What I did know is sales and marketing. I was pretty good at that. And so I'll give you a good sense of it. Like, I hired a senior guy from Hershey who ran the plant for me, right? And so I was pretty smart, because I was able to hire someone that knew what the hell they were doing and could make things work. And so it was easy for me to delegate there. Less so on the sales side. I had a marketing guy work for me. I think I drove him out of his mind, right? And a sales guy too. And because I tried to do too much and tried to do their jobs for them sometimes. So I mean, and the same on the financial side too. I knew enough about the financial stuff to be dangerous. So I got in the CFO's way a little bit. Fortunately, he was older than me, and he just said, "Back off," So yeah, delegation is somewhat easy when you don't know exactly how to do what you're supposed to be doing there, but when you have some expertise in something, that's when I think it gets harder.
It's a great point. And for me, it's data architecture, right? Like, I can't help but meddle when data architecture is involved, because that's where I grew up functionally, right? And so that's my sweet spot. So I have all these opinions that are actually rooted in some knowledge, versus knowing, hey, this person on my team does something that I just don't understand. I try to help support them and try to understand it as best I can from my perspective, but I don't have that level of knowledge to where I can meddle to a point. So I have to check that, like, when the closer it is to that thing I know, I have to make sure I'm not getting too close.
Like, even in some of those areas, my personality is meddling, so I had an opinion about everything, right? And but I also had some people that worked with me or for me that were not afraid to say, hey, we got this, and you don't really know what you're doing, in a nice way. And, and so it's not that I wanted to hear that, but that pushback was really, and I wasn't afraid to get pushback on. So,
yeah. Yeah, no, it's. I think about a time where someone that I was working with on a consulting engagement, I was doing some consulting work, and she turned to me and she's like, you're fussy. And I'm like, I am fussy, but I've also realized I'm not terribly attentive to details. So I'm like
Yeah,
at this like horrible mix of being both particular and
yeah,
not very attentive to detail. And so
yeah,
like, and it really varies on the situation, because actually in some cases I really am fuzzy, very attentive to detail, and other places I can't get my head around the detail, and it's a weird mix. So it got me thinking there. But regardless, so you have this focus in the business that you've created now with relationship impact, and one of the things that kind of threads all of this experience together is this focus on teams and leadership teams and how they can best be effective. And I really loved your introduction, because it helps us just kind of understand where you're coming from, because you have such an appreciation for how others on your teams, or that you've been part of a team with, really help your success and help your knowledge and growth move along. And
right.
so how did you determine that this was the business that you wanted to create with your co-founder? And then how do you go about understanding that and guiding people in that space?
So I think, when Gil Brady, my partner, who I met at West Point but we were both 17, we were pretty young guys, and now we're, closest friends. But when we put our heads together, we were like, we felt like, and again, this is a long story, very short. We over time, we really kind of felt like we had something very interesting to say about teams. We weren't overly articulate about it to start, but we got lucky because we had some friends that were running companies that gave us a chance and helped us test our approach. And so what our point of view was, that we saw were leadership teams in many of the organizations that we had worked with as consultants, or in Gil's case, as the head of marketing and sales at a pharmaceutical company, where we saw the teams that were actually getting in their own way and holding their organizations back, versus what a good team is supposed to be doing, is help accelerate the organization, right? And in many cases, we saw those, either the CEO or the team collectively, holding the organizations back. And so we were like, man, we think we have a point of view on how to address that. We're not stupid enough to know we can fix it in every situation, but we felt like we had some thoughts, ideas, and ultimately what we came up with is a methodology and approach where we could help teams, be that accelerator function and get out of their own way.
Mm-hmm. I really value the experiences that I've had in my own career, because having been a consultant or having been in industry in different contexts, I'd never been in the military, but I've seen these different examples across many different industries, and the ability to spot patterns and to be able to understand kind of the implications of those patterns. And this is in coaching I've done for other consultants. I'm curious how this lands with you. It's consulting first, like first stage consulting, 100 level consulting, is being able to understand the patterns and spot the patterns. And then elevated consulting is being able to know what makes this company unique compared to the pattern. And so patterns are the table stakes. It's what makes a great consultant is being able to understand the twists, the key changes that make this company's problems unique and difficult to solve. Because if you can pinpoint that, then you can unlock the coaching that you need to give to those leaders in that company to be able to write whatever is the challenge in front of them at that point. Would you agree with that? Or do you think it's more about the patterns?
I would agree with you 100%. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, Gil and I, over the course, I mean, we've been doing this for 13 years now. We struggle. We had some struggles up front, because and it's not so much we were trying to put a cookie cutter approach in place, but we're trying to put some principles and practices in place, right? And so I think Gil was probably always better at this than I was, or I am. It's recognizing that every organization is unique, and while there's some patterns and some common challenges that you might be seeing on the surface, those challenges might not manifest themselves the same way based on the construct of the organization you're dealing with. So I that resonates with me a lot. And oftentimes I find myself saying, well, they really shouldn't be doing that. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then I check myself and I'm like, well, maybe just ask a few more questions and see if in the context, so I'm working with a very fast-paced entrepreneurial company right now, and they lost their their human resource officer last summer, right? And so, my natural reaction was, yeah, you better fill that role and get it, and long story short, they still haven't filled that role, and everything's going just fine. The president had really good instincts around the young woman she put into place, and so they're not getting everything done, but they're getting what they need to get done for where they're at in their journey. I think they're pushing up against it now. So my only point there was like, my advice instincts were, you got to move, right? And she didn't even push back. She just kind of ignored me. She just said, yeah, we're gonna take this and methodically, right? And so that's a really good example of current state. I've been working with this company for a couple of years now, and so I'm still learning those lessons.
Yeah, well, it ties into another point that I know I'll be preaching to the choir on this one, but it's one of the worst things that a consultant can come in to do as they're engaging with a client is to come in and think you know more than they do about their business. Because I can promise you don't. They know their business better than you ever will. But if you can identify patterns of behavior and nuanced changes or things that make them unique, you may be able to provide a perspective that they lack. And that's really the goal, is can I provide a perspective and bring it from a place of your own knowledge that you can add to the solutioning of whatever they need to do, versus trying to say, I can come in and do their job better than them. You can't. They know more. Yeah. They've been there. They're in the details every day. They know their answers from their perspective. What you're trying to do is illuminate the dark side of whatever it is that you're trying to understand.
I think that's right. Yeah. And I think you said it very articulately. I might steal that.
Please do. I mean, because it's the same thing that you're talking about. Now, one thing I do want to talk about while we still have a little bit of time is that you've also written a book, and so you have a book that's out there. Can you talk a little bit about what your book's about and how that connects to what we've been talking about today?
Yeah. So one of the first clients that we had, where I had done a couple iterations with him and his team over a course of like 3-year period of time. And, we're out to lunch one day towards the end of the second kind of iteration. And he's like, look, man, you guys are pretty good at this. But you really don't have much of a point of view. You don't write a lot. You don't speak a lot. And so his point was, if you really want to do something with this and really be a thought leader and gain some more credibility, you need to tell your story better. And so it took me a long time I just published this book in June, but from that point on, I started writing. I write for Chief Executive Magazine every 2-3 months or so. And so that really got me on the journey of documenting what we're doing, right? And telling the story. And so fast forward a couple of years ago, I was like, I probably should write this down in a book. And really what building great leadership teams is all about is it has 3 big sections to it, right? It's got, the first is why leadership teams are so important from our perspective. The second is has 2 components to it. Why, how do you build a great leadership team? And from our perspective, there's structural things that build a great team, and there's relational dynamics that reinforce a great team. And there's an interplay between the 2 of those things. And then, and the third part is like, how do you do it? What do you do to to build, and what's the CEO's role in it, for example, because it goes back to, it's all about having the executive team be an accelerating body for the organization as they're trying to achieve whatever they're trying to achieve, right? It could be a nonprofit, it could be a for-profit entity, but there's always some sort of goal, right? And so are we getting in the way, or are we helping accelerate? And oftentimes we're getting in our way. And oftentimes we're getting in our way, and it's just annoying, and it's just not that big a deal. You don't need anyone to help you with that. But if it's getting in the way and it's holding you back and it's bleeding down into the other facets of the organization, then you need to do something about it. And most CEOs will address a problem like this as consultants do, with a structural solution. We'll fire him, hire her, we'll put a new process in place, and that'll fix the problem. But behind the scenes, there's been all this relational damage. Adults don't tend to like to confront each other, for example, and so there's passive aggressive crap, and that bleeds down into the warehouse, not talking to the salespeople, all those kind of things. They're real, and they actually really happen. And if you look up, you can typically see there's something going on with the leadership team that's potentially letting that happen. And so that's, from our perspective, we're all about how do you build the right structure and the right relational damage so that the team can be an accelerating body.
I really like how you talk about how the leadership team is an accelerator for the business. And I like thinking about parallels, and I think a lot about technology as an amplifier to the business, or to the data. And I think about the parallel of technology as an accelerator, and how some things, if we don't realize what technology exists to do, which is to accelerate business success, sometimes the technology gets created in a way that makes things slower. And this is all just basically an opportunity for me to rant about one of my latest annoyances, which is the technology and the applications and the user interfaces that require me to do 16 clicks when 3 would do. And so there's a lot of things that are emphasizing visual beauty, or cleanness of the visual, but is relying on, and this is particularly notable in web interfaces and stuff lately, that they'll do an upgrade which makes it look cleaner, but it's been developed not by people who understand the business, but by people who understand design or marketing. And they fail to realize that all of these clicks to do a simple task really degrades the ability for that technology to be utilized efficiently. And so if we do that on the technology side, or if we then bring it back to our leadership team side, if we are engaging and interacting as a leadership team with inefficient mechanisms, then does that degrade the output of the leadership teams? And so that leads me to the question, naturally, in our current state here in late August of 2022, have there been material changes in how leadership teams function, or the effectiveness of how they function, in a world now dominated by virtual collaboration versus in-person collaboration? Have you seen additional challenges due to that physical separation as part of the pandemic, or do you see leadership teams overcoming that?
I see teams and organizations overcoming it. I was very fortunate to have a few clients right when the pandemic hit, right, and so I had a petri dish of companies to look at, right, and there was this fast growing entrepreneurial commercial bank in New York that I've been working with. Man, they had prepared themselves. They didn't even know it, but from a technology perspective, they hit the ground running on, and think they had to do these PPP loans and stuff too. And so I'm not suggesting that they didn't, there was some brute force that didn't go into some of it in the back end, but getting everyone virtual and then getting people communicating, they did a magical job at it, as opposed to a couple of other companies that tried to prescribe too much of the rules of the game, and it backfired on them. And if that does that make sense? Like there was too much, like the entrepreneurial flavor of this organization. They were just like, go, and we'll get we'll get you a laptop, we'll get you what you need, and then they just they use Teams, and they just like it just so in my experience, which is not huge, right, in this world, in the question you're asking, I see organizations overcoming this. I see people my age still stressed about it, and like, why isn't everyone in the office? And I just had a conversation with the CEO I'm working with earlier, and she's like, I'm struggling to get people back, and my question is always, is the work getting done? And what about the culture? How's the culture? And so I hear what people are saying, that it takes a hit on culture, but I just think it takes a little extra work. So I don't know if that was kind of a roundabout way of getting to your question. I'm seeing it work, and I'm actually seeing the combination of this video stuff and of the virtual stuff and being present sometimes really working well.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that we can mostly agree, like, that the future of work is hybrid. There's going to be some times where we do get people together. There's going to be times when people are apart, but I don't know that many people think we're going back to the old ways anytime soon.
That's
for
why
sure.
I was actually surprised last week. You see, Apple just said they're going back. And they had an uprising. They said we got to come back to work 3 days a week, and people went crazy. And so I look at my son. My son's a software engineer for Google. He lives in Denver, works in Boulder, and's in New York for 3 days, working at their office in New York. Like, I don't think skipping a beat. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, and sometimes I think, from a leadership perspective, I think sometimes we come up with solutions that are in search of problems, and we sometimes misstate what the actual problem is. Like in this case, we think, oh, we need to get people back to the office. Well, no, what we need to do is make sure we are continuing to support an identity as a company, or that we are continuing to fulfill the needs of our employees to have strong morale and strong connections with each other.
Yeah.
But the problem isn't that people aren't in the office. The problem is actually there's some things that are very directly tied to our success as a business that we need to make sure that we're solving for, but we can't just naturally assume it's a perfect proxy to say, oh, well, we used to be in the office and now we're struggling with these things. Maybe now we need to get people back in the office. It doesn't work like that. It's not the solution anymore. It's actually going to cause even more trouble, as evidence with Apple.
I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. I do passionately believe that a combination of in-person time and maybe mostly virtual is like, again, I'm at my age, I'm 57 years old. Like the thought of not having any interactions with the teams that I work with face to face, grabbing a beer, so like I struggle with it. I really do, but we'll see. I mean, it certainly helped my business. I can do this, and it costs me a lot less. It costs the client a lot less to fly me places, and it's just it's not a bad gig.
Fewer flight delays is good news for everybody, like that. You spend so much wasted time for those moments, and there's still that emphasis. And I know, like, I am one who likes to be in the office. I live on the energy I get from being face to face with people, but I am also the biggest advocate of saying, do we need it, or is this about something else? And like, let's be thoughtful and intentional all the time. So while we still have a couple minutes, there's one other question that I'm going to ask you about is, we look at these leadership teams, and this is a data leadership podcast. And so one of the things that I'm curious about is, how do we measure and actually quantify the effectiveness of leadership teams, of the individuals participating? Do you have any advice on like how we might be able to measure that more effectively? Because I think there's a lot of focus into what we're doing, but a lot of times we forget, hey, these things could be measured and should be measured as well.
Yeah, no, I think, we believe that too, and it it's not as tangible as like you can't you can't directly say, hey, you worked with relationship impact for the last year and now your sales went up and you're more profitable. That would be innate. That would be asinine, right? But what we can do is we start off most of our engagements with using an objective instrument that measures structural elements of building a team and relational dynamics of building a team. And it talks about how their interplay between them. So it gives you a baseline for, this team, we think, and the people below us think we interact kind of destructively together. So that's something we're going to work on. And what does that mean? And so we peel back. So building, there is a foundation you can build to measure from, right? And so we use these as dialogue starters and as baselines. And what they do is they serve as the vehicle for the commitments that the teams need to make to each other to make improvements as a collective unit and as individuals. That are serving as members of that team. So, because it's a combination of both. So yeah, I mean, there is, but measuring measurement, it's really a subjective way, putting some objectivity on a subjective science.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. So, Jack, we're just about out of time. So, thank you. Before we go, what's the best way for folks to find you after the show?
Yeah, so I'm my website is relationship-impact.com, and you can go directly to Amazon to Building Great Leadership Teams, a practical approach for unleashing the full potential of your team. And the book is on there. So
awesome, Jack McGuinness. Thank you for being on the show today. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us today. As always, you'll find more information and all the links in the show notes. Go to dataleadershiplessons.com to subscribe and check out our past episodes and accelerate your journey with training at dataleadershiptraining.com. If you're enjoying data leadership lessons and are interested in electric vehicles, check out my new podcast at electricdrives.us. We give you the information you need to transition to your electric vehicle future. And as always, stay safe during these unusual times and go make an impact.